Have you ever wondered what your mother's life after 50 felt like? What she dreamed about or what she gave up quietly? I'm Dee Dee Sung, and this is Follow Your Lighthouse, where we explore what it really means to navigate life after 50 with clarity, courage, with purpose and grace. I've been thinking about my mother a lot lately. There's a question I never asked her, and I wish I had. What did midlife feel like for her? Not the version she showed the world, but the truth behind her steady strength. I find myself wondering what she carried, what she questioned, and what she might have told me if she'd had the language or the permission to say it out loud. Author Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie once wrote, "The older I get, the more I understand that true wisdom is found in listening, especially to the women whose stories were never told." This reflection is my way of doing just that, of listening across generations and of honoring the mothers and mother figures who shouldered more than we will ever know. And that's what this conversation is about, a moment to pause, to listen and reflect on the women who came before us, to honor their strength, their silence, and the untold stories that shaped who we became. Lately, I find myself wishing I'd asked my mother what midlife really felt like for her. The world she lived in looked calm on the surface, but full of things women didn't say out loud. She carried herself with grace, always composed, always steady, but I often wonder what that composure cost her. What did she hold inside to keep the peace? What questions did she carry that no one thought to ask? And what stories did she never get to tell? The ones that might have helped us understand our own lives more clearly. Somewhere in our 50s, we start to see our mothers differently, not as parents, but as women. We begin to sense the inner worlds they rarely shared, and we recognize parts of ourselves in their silence. And that's what I want to explore today, the untold stories of our mother's midlife and how they shaped who we became. If reflections like this help you see your own story more clearly, take a moment to like this video. It helps more women over 50 discover conversations like this one. And if you haven't yet, subscribe to Follow Your Lighthouse so you don't miss what's next in this series. Let's continue. When I say mother, I know it means something different for each of us. For some, it's the woman who gave you life, while for others it was a grandmother, an aunt, a teacher, a neighbor, someone who stepped in and loved you into being. And I want to acknowledge not everyone's story with their mother was gentle. Some of you carry wounds that haven't healed, relationships that were marked by absence, pain, or silence of a different kind. If that's your story, this conversation isn't asking you to honor a relationship that caused pain. Whatever your relationship with your mother was, you belong in this conversation. Your story matters, and this next chapter can be different. The idea of mother reaches beyond language. In Mandarin, Ma is linked to origin and earth, the grounding source of life. In Swahili, Mama carries respect and authority, the foundation of family and community. In English, mother often symbolizes both care and identity, the person who shapes, guides, and connects. However you define it, there was likely a woman, by presence or by absence, who helped shape how you see yourself today. And it's her generation I want to honor in this conversation. Because whether your mother's story was one of joy, hardship, or stoic endurance, her life set the backdrop for your own. Our stories didn't begin with us, and they won't end with us either. When we think about the women who came before us, it's easy to see only the surface, the routines, the responsibilities, the grace they carried so steadfastly. But beneath that calm exterior lived an entire emotional landscape few ever asked them about. And that's where the real story begins, in what was felt but rarely spoken. For many women of our mother's era, Life after 50 wasn't something to talk about. There was no language for transition or reinvention. Strength was measured by endurance, not expression. They were told that being a good woman meant holding everything together while showing very little of themselves. Purpose was defined by service to family, community, stability. Desire was private. Doubt was personal. Imagine being 50 in 1970. The feminist movement was growing, but not everyone felt its reach. If you worked outside the home, you were grateful just to be there. If you stayed home, you were expected to be content. And while their world looked different, some of those unspoken rules still echo today. No one asked, "What do you want next?" And while their world looked different, some of those unspoken rules still echo today. Even in their silence, they were teaching us about strength, survival, and how to find meaning when the world gives you few choices. You see, we may have inherited their silence, but we also inherited their resilience. And now we have the language they didn't, to name what they could only feel or wonder about. Have you ever caught yourself following expectations you never actually chose? That's the inheritance talking. For most women then, life after 50 wasn't seen as a moment to pause and reimagine. It was simply about more of what came before. But inside, the questions were still there. Who am I now? What else might be possible? Those questions rarely found a voice, and so much wisdom was lost in that silence. When I think about that generation, about my mother and her peers, I realize how much of their story lives in us. Their patterns became our starting points. Their unspoken rules shaped how we measure worth, love, and even possibility. And whether we mean to or not, we carry pieces of their worldview into our own midlife until we stop and ask whether they still fit the lives we are building now. Because our beliefs about aging, ambition, and worth come from what we witnessed growing up. We learned what strength looked like by watching how the women before us endured. We learned how to hide pain the way they did, behind a smile. Some of those lessons became our foundation, others became invisible barriers. In our own midlife, we're invited to look closely and ask, which beliefs still serve me? Which ones hold me back? Maybe this season is our moment to pause, the moment we decide what stays and what goes, and that isn't rebellion, it's reflection. Maybe that's where grace begins, not in rejecting what came before, but in understanding it and finding a new way to live from it. So much of what I understand about strength and dignity came from my mother, Vera. Her name means truth in Latin, and that feels right because everything about her reflected a kind of deep truth, strength without display, grace without words. And though her life was shaped by a very different time and by expectations I can only imagine, I see how much of my own journey began with hers. My mom was a second-generation Chinese-Canadian woman who came of age in the 1940s and 50s. By the time she reached her 50s, that would be in the late 60s, she had lived through more change than most people see in a lifetime. She lost her mother when she was quite young, so she never had a model for what life after 50 looked like. No example of how a woman ages, questions, or begins again. She lost a child, and she carried that grief the way women of her generation were taught to, quietly, privately, without letting it show. There was no language then for that kind of sorrow, no permission to let it reshape you. She lived with dignity, duty, and poise as if composure were a kind of armor against uncertainty. Culturally, she was taught to hold things in, to be strong by being contained, to be graceful by being silent. It was strength shaped by restraint, the kind you learn when life demands you endure more than you reveal. Sometimes I wonder how hard that was to maintain. What did she feel as her midlife unfolded? When her role shifted, when no one was watching? What questions lived inside her that no one thought to ask? I hold immense gratitude for my mother. Her unspoken strength became the ground I stand on. And yet, as I move through this season of life, I realize how many conversations I wish I could have had, the kind that name the fears beneath the composure. She followed her lighthouse in the ways that were possible then. Her endurance became the soil where my own courage could grow. And if she could see Follow Your Lighthouse now, I think she'd smile. That soft, knowing smile of hers, not for the project itself, but for what it represents. Women over 50 continuing the work of asking, seeking, and giving voice to what once went unspoken. When I think of my mother, I think of every woman who bore more weight than she could say and still found a way to keep going. And perhaps you do too. Maybe there was someone in your life, a mother, an auntie, a mentor, or a friend whose steadfast strength helped shape who you've become. Each of those women lived within a larger story, one shaped by the time and culture they came from. My mother's experience wasn't unique to her. It reflected the reality of an entire generation. It helps to remember the world our mothers were navigating. Between 1960 and 1980, the landscape for women began to change. Education expanded, workplaces shifted, and expectations slowly began to bend, but change came unevenly. Many women were still caught between new possibilities and old expectations. They were stepping into a wider world, yet still expected to hold everything together at home. And the idea of wanting something more for yourself could still be met with, well, subtle judgment. Even amid progress, they were expected to remain modest, grateful, contained. They didn't have role models for what fulfillment could look like at 50. They were becoming them. And though they rarely spoke of their longing out loud, we learned from their example how to endure, but also how to hold back. But today, that silence is breaking. Women speak openly about menopause, reinvention, purpose, and change. Across cultures, conversations once confined to whispers are happening in daylight. We are the generation giving language to what they live through, redefining what it means to age with visibility, vitality, and value. And in doing so, we're not leaving their legacy behind. We're carrying it forward, giving it voice. When I think about how far we've come from the world our mothers navigated to the one we live in now, I can't help but marvel at the span of transformation in just a handful of decades. The story of life after 50 keeps evolving through women like us. Each generation adds its own verse. Now it's our turn to write ours with intention. When you pause and really take in everything our mothers carried, it's hard not to feel both gratitude and grief. Gratitude for the paths they cleared and sorrow for all they weren't able to explore. But their story isn't finished. It continues in us, in how we choose to live, question, and redefine what's possible. Whether your mother's story brings you comfort or complexity, whether it fills you with gratitude or sadness, or both at once, her story is part of what brought you here. And now you get to write this next chapter on your own terms. In part 2 of this conversation, we'll explore what we do with this inheritance, how to honor their story without being limited by it, and how our generation is redefining what strength, purpose, and grace can mean. I hope you'll join me. If this resonated with you, subscribe so you don't miss part 2. And consider giving this video a like, because it helps more women over 50 find messages like this one. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. What's one question you wish you could have asked the women who came before you about life after 50? or one question you're answering differently now. Thanks for being here. Take care, and I'll see you in part 2.